It was a good effort all the way around.
I know we had sheets and crock pots and lots of household items that were given to the McKinney-Vento for the housing.
That's great. Now I know that they said if it went well, there might be plans for another Saturday. Are we still thinking that, or is it too soon to think about another day? Does anybody know? They're thinking about it. We don't know if it'll happen. They'll let you know if it happens. So great. Those of you just tuning in, the rummage sale netted about $1,600. We had lots of great help, and it seemed to go really smoothly. I just heard little things from the back room where I was board of directoring as we approved our budget for the conference and those kinds of things. And with that, the idea of the conference or the annual conference meeting is going to be held jointly with Nebraska and Iowa virtually on October 17th. So that will be a good time for us to all tune in and not have to spend a lot of money, but to find out what's going on in the whole tri-conference. What else is going on? Can't hear me? I'm loud. Maybe my shield is blocking my voice. It could be. Kylie's going to turn that up a little bit and see if that helps. Earlier, it was too loud. There we go. Is that better? Okay. I think when we turned off the other microphones from the singers last week, we got this turned down. Anything else going on? We do want to recognize that we had to have to mourn the passing of Don Stabner the other morning at 4 o'clock. Was it? So he had to tumble out of bed and ultimately ended up. It had some good moments though right at the end, I heard. His last moments were joking around and having fun, and the funeral is Friday at 10 a.m. Thank you. I should have known that, but I couldn't remember what time it was. So I'm sure Rosie would appreciate your cards and your presence at the funeral. They'll both be spots in here, and if you want to listen in the parking lot, it will be on the radio as well on the FM or on the AM station. So our prayers go out to Rosie and the rest of Don's family. Anything else that we need to know? There are a few other things I think in the bulletin. There's some, we've got a couple of birthdays coming up. We've got donations for the Cornerstone Mission Meal. If you make donations for that, please note that on the check or the envelope or whatever it is, so that we are aware that that's where the monies should go. Those costs have gone up a little bit. And our August mission is Placerville. I know that Carrie said they have 2.5 buses full now, and they're hoping to fill 4 buses. I kind of had to chuckle when they posted that last week. Somebody said, ooh, not a good idea with what happened at Camp Judson. Somebody who didn't recognize they were virtual campers they're trying to get as opposed to real live in-person campers. But they're trying to fill some buses to help. They still have costs up at Placerville, and they're taking opportunity to do some big projects while they're there. So if you are on the Placerville page, you see updates of some of those. Anything else? Good to see those of you that are here and those of you that are on Zoom. So I would invite you just to take a few deep breaths and let all those things going on in our mind, all those things we worry about and those things we need to accomplish today, just let those things sort of fade into the background. So we can be present here with God, recognizing that surely God is in this space with these people, whether it's virtual or in person. God is with us everywhere and always. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity.
It is like a summer rain which restores the parched earth.
It is like a cool breeze at the shore of a lake, at the top of a mountain, or through a crowded city street. We have gathered to worship the maker of our days, the restorer of our souls, and the breath of our lives. Maker of our days, you created each of us unique beings with differing strengths and weaknesses. Help us not only to use our strengths to assist others, but also to allow others to use their strengths to meet our weaknesses. Restorer of our souls, you have seen the parched places we have made in our lives, along with the devastation thrust upon us by the action or inaction of others. Meet us in the places of our deepest pain, so that our masks of self-sufficiency might fall away, and we might be drawn into right relationship with you and one another. Breath of our lives, without you, we are but a mound of clay. Fill us with your presence. Invigorate our worship. Set us on fire so that others might be drawn into your light and nurtured by the warmth of your loving care. Now please join in the hymn, How Firm a Foundation.
Lord have mercy.
Time for personal reflection and confession. We have not recognized God at work in the faith of others.
Christ have mercy.
Time for personal reflection. Oh, sorry, you're supposed to have time for personal reflection. I should read this first. I'm going to start this all over because we're flexible. So we'll start the prayer of confession again. When we try to go it on our own, lacking faith in divine providence.
Mercy.
When we have not recognized God at work in the faith of others.
Christ have mercy.
In all that we have done and all that we have left undone.
Lord have mercy.
God calls each of us by name and cries out with tears of joy as we recognize God in our admission of need. Challenges us to let go of our guilt, provides a way.
It's a way for us to walk on together.
Good morning. The first lesson comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verses 1 through 4 and 12 through 28. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock of his brothers. He was a helper to his sons Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brother went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem and found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Please tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I have heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him not into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt.
Before we sing this next song, I screwed up a little bit when I put the lyrics in the bulletin. So it says refrain several times. The song doesn't have a refrain. But the part that says refrain, at the very end of the song, we will sing those two lines. No storm can shake it. So we'll do the best we can.
The gospel lesson today comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 through 23. I don't think that's correct. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. When he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got him into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
Stories of the Bible. Peter walks on water. This is Peter.
Hey-o! Whoop!
Peter was a fisherman who was called by Jesus.
Hey!
Peter saw the many miracles of Jesus,
Whoa!
and he heard all his teachings. Great crowds followed Jesus wherever he went. One day, after Jesus had done a great miracle, he sent the disciples in a boat across the lake while he stayed and sent the people home.
See ya! Hey, Jesus.
After sending them home, Jesus went up into the hills by himself to pray. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves.
Ah!
About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified.
Ah!
In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!"
Hold on there.
But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." So Jesus said, "Yes, come." So Peter went over the side of the boat
Whoa, you're awesome.
and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves,
Ah! Whoa!
he was terrified and began to sink.
Jesus, help me.
"Save me, Lord!" he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. Jesus said, "You have so little faith. Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him and said, "You really are the Son of God."
It's so much fun looking for those little cartoon clips that will retell the scripture. And I think even as adults, we sometimes can get the story better when we have those silly little visuals to go with it. So as I said, some of you joined in after we did things. Bruce and Levon are on their way to, are in Michigan, I think now, and I see Levon is on the Zoom, so I'm assuming Bruce is there too. And so it's good that they were able to get away from some of the things here and take a little vacation and see some family. The storms and troubled waters, strife and struggles for power, squabbling over things that don't seem very important when we look back. All these things going on in Genesis and Matthew, they're certainly echoed in our world today. They're echoed literally and figuratively. You know, in Genesis, we had the jealous brothers who sell Joseph off to a traveling caravan, who let their egos and their pride and their competitiveness and self-righteousness be their self-serving vision, rather than being true to what their father Jacob taught them and expected from them. And an idea begins to form that this little brother, to put this little brother in his place, but it quickly spirals out of control. Certainly, I don't think it was premeditated or well thought out. Let's be rid of Joseph. He doesn't really do anything, and he's just a dreamer, but our father thinks he's so great. Let's kill him. Let's pretend that wild animals got him. I can just see a group, I teach 8th graders, I can see a group of kids saying, let's do this to them in their passion to get revenge or to their self-righteousness. But at least one of the brothers had a little compassion and said, oh, let's not actually kill him. Let's just sell him away. Then we profit too. And we can still give the fake news that he's dead. Okay, maybe he's not so compassionate, but added another little rift to their idea. And I wonder, I suspect they weren't really serious to begin with, or just thinking out loud about possibilities that they could do. But while still in the throes of that thinking, then the opportunity presented itself before they really had time to reconsider. And Joseph was gone. Troubled waters. Certainly the waters were troubled for Joseph. We walk on troubled waters every day, even though the land is dry, but that metaphor of the troubled waters is there. We have troubled cultures, troubled systems, troubled health concerns, troubled power concerns, trouble everywhere. And when Jesus sends his disciples out to fish, something that they did often and well, so we can be alone and reflect on all that has happened, they run into troubled waters too. The storm arises and the waves rise, the wind howls and the waters are more troubled than they fear they can deal with. I don't know about you, but I feel that way about our world sometimes these days. There's more trouble than I can deal with, more trouble than anything that I can control. And in the midst of the storm, the disciples look out over the bow of their boat and they see a figure, a person walking right through the storm, right over the windswept waves, right through the trouble towards them. In their already heightened state of fear and dread, confusion and futility, they don't recognize Jesus, and they're only more afraid. So Jesus calls out, "Take heart, do not be afraid." Well, Peter gulps and responds with false courage, I suspect. "If it's you, Lord, let me walk with you." And Jesus says, "Come." And Peter steps out of the boat. And at first, all is great. Peter walks through the same storm, right over the windswept waves, right through the trouble, towards Jesus. But then, as we are all like to do, he remembers the trouble. And his fear and dread, his feelings of futility and vulnerability return. He takes his eyes off of Jesus and focuses on the troubled waters and his own troubled spirit. And he starts to sink. "Lord, save me." And he does. Because he can. Because he's right there with him. He says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And there's the question for us all. Why do we doubt? Even in the midst of troubled waters, troubled days, troubled times, when there are genuine storms of which to be afraid, why do we doubt? Our still speaking God is today reminding us that in this time of trouble, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus rather than just on the troubles and the fear. Now, I don't think that means that we just sit and wait passively for a miracle to solve the world's troubles. It's not all going to just go away. We won't wake up tomorrow and find it's all been a nightmare, but now it's over. It will take time and work and self-reflection, and we will need to be responsible and accountable and selfless to get past it. We will need to keep our eyes on Jesus. I was talking with some friends earlier this week who are great people, good churchgoers, faithful Christians, and their take on the troubles that we face was that it's all up to God. And that if it's our time to go, it's our time to go. And so why take precautions or why worry about it? No matter what, if it's our time, it's our time. And if it's not, God won't take us. I struggle with that interpretation of trusting God because I think it's a fatalistic vision that makes our choices irrelevant and doesn't mean we have to be held accountable for anything. With that sort of vision, we could drive at night with no headlights on because God will keep us safe or call us home. What we do doesn't matter. We could jump out of an airplane without knowing if our parachute works because it really doesn't matter. It will be our time or not. We could do any number of foolish, risky things because it's all fated. And God has predetermined when it's our time to go, when our time here on earth is over. And I don't believe that the God who made us to be creative beings, who made us in God's own image, created us without the powers of self-actualization, without the ability to make choices that affect our lives and our world. Rather, I think keeping our faith in God, keeping our eyes on Jesus as we walk through the troubled waters of our world means that we trust Jesus is right here to pull us back up when we start to sink. When we, as we are very ought to do, when we give in to fear, when we suddenly remember just how troubled our waters are. I think it means we trust that God has given us what we need to make choices that are just and selfless, that we have the wherewithal to be smart and strong and resilient without giving in to the fear that would cause us to sink into acceptance of the trouble and to being a victim of the storms around us. I remember growing up, and even as an adult and a leader, there was a time when trust falls were really a huge part of building community. If you never did a trust fall, that's when somebody stands with their arms crossed, their back to a group of people, and they fall backwards, trusting that group of people with linked arms will catch them. They never worried, they had to trust that they wouldn't drop them. And I have to tell you, I hated that activity, both as a kid and as an adult. But I only hated it when I was the one to fall. I didn't hate it when I was the one to hold up others. But when it was my turn, I held on to fears about myself. I never worried they would trick me or pull away intentionally. I just worried that my big old body would be too much for their hands to handle, and that I would fall anyway. The good news is that no one's big old body is too much for Jesus to pull up, or to hold on to, or to support. But focusing on ourselves and focusing on the fear that we feel, the vulnerability, our inadequacies, and the lack of control, that focus is sure to make us sink. During this pandemic, I've spent a lot more time on the internet than I usually do, and I can see how it becomes a little addictive sometimes. But I did a little bit of impulse buying occasionally. And one of the things that I bought with a company that said they were, going out of sale and things were 90% off. I still see that 3 months later, so I'm not sure how true it was. But I bought a bunch of little necklaces that said on them, had a little life boy, ring boy, that said, "I refuse to sink." And I think that's really appropriate in these times that, like Peter, when we walk on troubled water, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus and refuse to sink. We need to refuse to give in to our fears and our doubts about how it will all end up. A familiar passage from Micah 6:8 says to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. As we traverse the troubled waters of our world, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus and act justly and love mercy and know that God walks with us just as we walk with God. And it doesn't mean that we do nothing. It doesn't mean we give up or stay silent in the face of injustice or take no actions to protect ourselves and others in the midst of troubled waters. It doesn't mean that we're passive participants in a life that's predetermined. It doesn't even mean that we never have doubts or that we're unaware of the storm that swirls around us. It does mean that we trust God is walking with us. We trust Jesus has called us to come, and that when we allow doubt and fear to overwhelm us, Jesus will restore us to our created selves, to our reflections of God's image, so we can continue to move forward with the faith that we are the ones upon whom God's eyes rest. God will not look away. And Joseph, the little brother in the Genesis story who was sold into slavery, troubled times indeed for him. But just to be sure you know, the rest of that story is that he keeps his eyes on God and ultimately makes a bad situation one that turns out pretty good. He stayed faithful even in the worst of storms and trusted God. May we do the same in the midst of our storms. Amen and amen. So just a reminder as we come to this time in the bulletin where it calls for our offering that the church is still functioning, that even though we have not many folks in our pews, we have some on Zoom, some in the parking lot, and some worshiping in their homes, that we still as a church are helping with missions, that we are still doing the work of the church, and therefore our offering of prayer and monetary offerings and time are still greatly appreciated. So thank you for those who left offerings in the narthex as you came in or as you leave, and those who are sending them to us. It is greatly appreciated and used well in your name. In honor of that, let's stand and sing the doxology. Praise God. Holy God, please join in this. You're our provider. We dedicate to your service our lives and these offerings from your blessing and our labor. Work in us and through us to extend your love and care here and around our world. Amen. I'm going to ask you to be seated because we have a little bit of praying to do that I either left out of the bulletin or skipped over. So we'll do that before we do our closing hymn. Do we have any other prayer requests besides those for Rosie and Don's family as they grieve Don? And those, of course, are our troubled world. Please join me in prayer. Gracious God, you walk with us wherever we go. Whether we are walking through days that are painless and calm and celebratory, or whether we are walking through storms. Sometimes storms of our own making, sometimes those that come at us unexpectedly. Sometimes those that seem to go on and on and on. We come to you, Lord, knowing that only with your help can we get through these storms. Only with your help and your presence can we refuse to think. Can we keep above the storms that try so hard to wipe us out and drown us and bring us to despair? We ask that during these days you especially be present with Don Stabner's family as they mourn his death, but celebrate his life. For certainly, as one of your faithful servants, he has made a difference to so many people in this community, in this state, in this country. We ask, Lord, that you be with those who are traveling during the end of our summer days, that are visiting friends, that are those that are preparing to begin school, those who are celebrating their freedoms and recognizing their responsibilities. We ask, Lord, that you be with us always, that you speak to us, that you call us to come, and that we can remember that your eyes are on us. And with that, we will never sink. We ask all of this, Lord, in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. This day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I would invite you to stand again if you are present. You can stand at home too if you want. But we will sing our closing hymn, I Will Trust in the Lord. You have been reconciled with Christ. Do the work of Christ in the world. Extend a hand to those in need. Speak up for those cast aside. Build bridges of reconciliation. Strengthen bonds of community. Knowing that the maker of our days, the restorer of our souls, and the breath of our lives will be with you this day and evermore. Go in peace. Thanks be to God. Good seeing you all. Have a good week.